My name is Olivia Caldwell, and last spring I discovered that my mother had secretly transferred our $2 million family estate to my younger sister. I thought we were close, but one phone call from an unfamiliar lawyer shattered everything. I believed about my family. What happened next taught me the most painful lesson about setting boundaries with those you love. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up in Oak Ridge Manor, our family estate nestled in the rolling countryside just outside of Westbrook, I never questioned my place in the family. The sprawling Victorian home with its manicured gardens and century-old oak trees had been in the Caldwell family for 4 generations. My great-grandfather had built it after making his fortune in publishing, and it had passed down through the family ever since. I'm the eldest of 2 daughters, always the responsible one with a natural talent for numbers and practical thinking. At 38, I've built a successful career as a financial advisor at a respected firm in the city. I live in a modest but comfortable apartment downtown, close to my office, and have always prioritized financial independence and security. My sister, Eleanor, is 5 years younger and completely different from me. Where I'm pragmatic and reserved, she's creative and expressive, pursuing a career as an artist with varying degrees of success. Our mother, Catherine, always said we were 2 sides of the same coin, different but equally valuable. At least, that's what I believed until that Tuesday afternoon when my phone rang. "Is this Olivia Caldwell?" The male voice on the other end was formal, unfamiliar. "Yes, speaking," I replied, distracted by the quarterly reports I was reviewing for a client meeting. "My name is Andrew Bennett from Bennett & Associates Law Firm. I'm calling regarding the Caldwell family estate. I understand you might have some questions about the recent transfer of ownership." I froze, my cursor blinking on the spreadsheet in front of me. "Transfer of ownership? What are you talking about?" There was a pause on the line. "I apologize, Ms. Caldwell. I assumed you were aware. Your mother, Catherine Caldwell, transferred the full deed and ownership rights of Oak Ridge Manor to your sister, Eleanor Caldwell, approximately 3 months ago. The paperwork was finalized last week." My office suddenly felt too small, the air too thin. There must be some mistake. My mother would have told me about something like this. "I'm afraid there's no mistake," Mr. Bennett continued, his voice professionally detached. Mrs. Caldwell was quite clear about her intentions. She indicated that family discussions had taken place. But there had been no discussions, no conversations about the future of our family home. Nothing that would have prepared me for this revelation. "I see," I managed to say, though I didn't see it all. "Thank you for the information, Mr. Bennett." After hanging up, I sat motionless at my desk, trying to process what I'd just learned. Oak Ridge Manor, the home where I'd taken my first steps, where my father had taught me to ride a bicycle on the winding driveway, where we'd celebrated every Christmas and milestone, had been given to Eleanor without so much as a conversation. With me. My first instinct was that there had been a misunderstanding. Mother was 72 now, still sharp and independent, but perhaps there had been some confusion about her intentions. I dialed her number, my heart pounding as I waited for her to answer. "Olivia, darling." Her familiar voice came through, warm and pleasant as always. What a lovely surprise. I was just about to have my afternoon tea. "Mom?" I struggled to keep my voice steady. "I just received a call from a lawyer named Andrew Bennett about Oak Ridge Manor." The silence that followed confirmed everything. It wasn't a mistake. "I was going to tell you, dear," she finally said, her tone shifting to something more defensive. "I just needed to wait for the right moment." "The right moment? Mom, the transfer is already complete. When exactly were you planning to tell me that you gave our family home to Eleanor?" "You're being dramatic, Olivia," Mother replied with the dismissive tone she'd always used when I questioned her decisions. "Eleanor needs the security more than you do. You have your career, your savings. You've always been the independent one. That's not the point, I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to remain calm. This isn't about who needs what. It's about making such an enormous decision without even discussing it with me. Eleanor is struggling, Olivia. Her gallery closed last year, and she has the children to think about. James hasn't been reliable with child support since the divorce. I closed my eyes, familiar with this narrative. Eleanor's husband had left her 3 years ago, leaving her to raise their 2 children, Sophia and Lucas, ages 10 and 8. It had been difficult, certainly, but this wasn't the first time my mother had stepped in to rescue Eleanor from the consequences of her choices. I understand Eleanor is going through a hard time, I said carefully. But that doesn't explain why you would transfer the entire estate to her without any conversation with me. That house is my inheritance too. You've never shown any interest in living at Oak Ridge, Mother countered. You've built your life in the city. What would you even do with a house this size? The question stung because there was some truth to it. I hadn't planned to live in the family estate, but I had always assumed we would make decisions about its future together, as a family. Perhaps we would sell it and split the proceeds, or find another arrangement that honored our shared heritage. That should have been a discussion we had together, I insisted, not a decision you made unilaterally. I did what I thought was best for this family, Mother said firmly. Eleanor and the children have moved in already. They need the stability. The revelation hit me like another blow. They've already moved in? When did this happen? About a month ago, she admitted. Eleanor's lease was ending, and it seemed the perfect solution. I realized then that this had been in the works for some time. Plans had been made, arrangements finalized, lives rearranged, all without my knowledge. The exclusion felt deliberate and painful. I need to go, I said, abruptly, unable to continue the conversation without saying things I might regret. Olivia, please understand, Mother began, but I had already ended the call. I sat in my office, staring out at the city skyline as the implications of what I'd learned sank in. Beyond the significant financial impact, Oak Ridge was worth it me. Least $2 million in today's market. There was the deeper wound of being so completely discounted in a major family decision. My phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor. Mom told me you know about Oak Ridge. I wanted to tell you myself, but she thought it would be better coming from her. Can we talk? I didn't respond. What was there to say? Congratulations on your surprise. Inheritance? Thank you for not mentioning that you've been living in our family home for a month? Instead, I did what I always do when facing a problem. I analyzed it methodically. I pulled up property records online, confirming what Mr. Bennett had told me. The deed to Oak Ridge Manor had indeed been transferred solely to Eleanor Rose Caldwell. My name appeared nowhere on the documents. Next, I reviewed my parents' will, which I had a copy of since my father's death 7 years ago. Originally, the estate had been left equally to both daughters. Clearly, Mother had made changes without updating me. As the day turned to evening, my initial shock gave way to a deeper sense of betrayal. This wasn't just about the house or the money. It was about being erased from a significant part of my family's legacy, about having my interests and feelings dismissed as irrelevant. When I finally left the office, instead of heading to my apartment, I found myself driving toward Oak Ridge. The hour-long journey gave me time to gather my thoughts, to prepare for the confrontation that was inevitable. I wasn't sure exactly what I wanted to say or what outcome I hoped for, but I knew I couldn't simply accept this situation without standing up for myself. As I turned onto the familiar tree-lined driveway, the sight of Oak Ridge Manor in the early evening light brought a rush of memories. Summer days spent reading under the willow tree, helping my father in the greenhouse, holiday gatherings that filled every room with laughter and conversation. Now, unfamiliar cars sat in the circular driveway, Eleanor's SUV, and another vehicle I didn't recognize. Children's bicycles leaned against the porch, and colorful planters that weren't there during my last visit brightened the entrance steps. The house already looked different, claimed by its new occupants. Taking a deep breath, I parked behind Eleanor's car and walked to the front door, uncertain of what awaited me but determined to have the conversation that should have happened months ago. Eleanor opened the door before I could knock, her expression a mixture of guilt and defiance. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a messy bun, paint smudges on her faded jeans evidence of her latest artistic endeavor. "Olivia," she said, stepping aside to let me in. "I've been trying to reach you all afternoon." I entered the foyer, immediately noticing changes. The antique console table that had always displayed family photographs had been replaced with a modern piece covered in children's artwork and school papers. The formal sitting room visible through the archway now contained an easel and art supplies. "You've been busy redecorating," I observed, unable to keep the edge from my voice. Eleanor sighed. "I know you're upset. Let's talk in the kitchen." I followed her through the house, cataloging every change along the way. Family heirlooms had been moved or replaced, walls repainted in vibrant colors, spaces repurposed to accommodate Eleanor's artistic pursuits and the children's activities. The kitchen, at least, remained largely as I remembered, though the refrigerator was now covered with spelling tests and colorful drawings. Eleanor gestured for me to sit at the farmhouse table where we'd eaten countless family meals. "Would you like some tea?" she offered. "What I'd like is an explanation," I replied, remaining standing. "Why didn't you tell me about this, Eleanor? We're sisters." She filled the electric kettle despite my refusal. "It wasn't my place to tell you. Mom said she would handle it." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot. To us. Now back to the story. "And you didn't think to ask if she had? You just moved in and started changing everything without once considering how I might feel about it?" Eleanor turned to face me, her shoulders squaring defensively. "This isn't about erasing our childhood, Olivia. It's about giving my children stability after everything they've been through." "Don't use Sophia and Lucas to deflect," I said, my voice low but firm. "This is about you accepting a multi-million-dollar gift behind my back." "I didn't ask for this," Eleanor countered, though her eyes dropped from mine. "Mom offered, and yes, I accepted. What was I supposed to do? Refuse a solution that solved all our problems?" "You were supposed to be honest with me," I insisted. "You were supposed to acknowledge that this house belongs to both of us." The kettle clicked off, and Eleanor busied herself preparing tea, clearly needing the distraction. "Mom doesn't see it that way. She says you've built your own life, that you don't need Oak Ridge." "And you believe that justifies cutting me out completely?" I asked, incredulous. "Do you have any idea how this feels, Eleanor? To discover from a stranger that my sister and mother have essentially erased my inheritance without so much as a conversation?" Eleanor placed a mug of tea in front of me that I didn't touch. "I understand you're hurt." "No, you don't understand at all," I interrupted. "This isn't just about the money or the property. It's about the complete disregard. For me as part of this family." A small voice from the doorway interrupted our conversation. "Aunt Olivia?" I turned to see Sophia, her dark hair in braids, watching us uncertainly. Behind her stood Lucas, clutching a tablet to his chest like a shield. My anger deflated slightly at the sight of them. Whatever issues I had with their mother, they were innocent in all this. "Hey guys," I said, softening my tone. "I didn't mean to interrupt your evening." "Are you staying for dinner?" Lucas asked hopefully. "We're having spaghetti." Before I could respond, Eleanor intervened. "Aunt Olivia just stopped by briefly, sweetie. Why don't you two finish your homework in the den?" Once the children had reluctantly retreated, Eleanor leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "This is their home now, Olivia. They've finally settled after the divorce. They're in a good school district. They have space to play. They're close. To Mom, who helps with childcare. I'm not suggesting you should be homeless, Eleanor, I said, frustrated by her defensive stance. But there were other options. Mom could have sold this place and helped you buy something suitable. She could have set up a trust that included both of us. She could have done practically anything other than completely cutting me out. Why does it matter so much to you? Eleanor challenged. You've never wanted to live here. You barely visit. Anymore? You have your fancy career and your city life. The question felt like a slap. How could she not understand the fundamental unfairness of what had happened? It matters because it's my heritage too, I explained, trying to remain calm. It matters because decisions like this should involve all affected parties. It matters because apparently my own mother and sister think so little of me that they orchestrated this behind my back. Eleanor had the grace to look uncomfortable. That's not fair. We weren't trying to hurt you. But you did hurt me, I said quietly. And neither of you seems to care. The back door opened before Eleanor could respond, and our mother entered carrying a canvas grocery bag. She froze momentarily upon seeing me, then recovered with practiced poise. Olivia, what a surprise, she said, setting the bag on the counter. I didn't realize you were coming. Clearly, I replied. There's a lot you didn't tell me. Mother glanced at Eleanor, their silent communication confirming my suspicions about their united front. I see you two have been discussing the house. Not discussing, I corrected. That would imply a two-way conversation, something that should have happened months ago, before you gave away my inheritance. Don't be melodramatic, Olivia, Mother chided, removing items from the grocery bag as if we were discussing something as trivial as dinner plans. I made a practical decision based on current needs. Eleanor needs this house, you don't. That wasn't your decision to make unilaterally, I insisted, and need isn't the only consideration here. What about fairness? What about honoring Dad's wishes that we both inherit equally? Mother's expression hardened. Your father isn't here to see how circumstances have changed. I am, and I did what any mother would do. I provided for the child who needed help. At the complete expense of the other child, I pointed out. What exactly am I inheriting? Now, Mom? Have you set anything aside for me, or does being financially responsible mean I deserve nothing? Mother's lips pressed into a thin line. This attitude is precisely why I didn't discuss it with you first. You've always been so rigid, so focused on what's fair rather than what's needed. And you've always enabled Eleanor at my expense. I shot back, years of accumulated resentment bubbling to the surface. Every time she's faced consequences for her choices, you've stepped in to rescue her. That's unfair, Eleanor protested. I didn't choose for James to leave us. No, but you chose to marry him despite everyone's concerns, I reminded her. You chose to quit your stable job to pursue art full-time without a financial plan. You chose to rent an apartment you couldn't afford on your own. So, I deserve to struggle forever because I made some mistakes? Eleanor's voice rose. Not everyone can be perfect like you, Olivia. I'm not perfect, I said, exasperated. I've just accepted the consequences of my decisions instead of expecting Mom to fix everything. Mother stepped between us, her authoritative presence filling the kitchen. That's enough. I won't have you two fighting like this. What's done is done, Olivia. The house belongs to Eleanor now. You need to accept that and move forward. The dismissal in her tone, the complete lack of recognition that I had any legitimate grievance, made something shift inside me. A lifetime of accommodating, of being the reasonable one, of putting family harmony above my own needs, suddenly felt like an unbearable weight. No, I said firmly. I don't need to accept anything. Mother blinked, unused to direct opposition. From me. Excuse me? I said no. I repeated, stronger this time. I don't accept this situation. I don't accept being treated as if my feelings don't matter. And I certainly don't accept being informed about major decisions affecting my inheritance after they've already been finalized. What exactly do you plan to do? Eleanor asked, a note of panic in her voice. Contest the transfer? Sue your own family? I looked between them. My mother, so certain of her authority that she never questioned her own decisions, and my sister, accustomed to being rescued from the consequences of her choices. In that moment, I realized that no legal action could address the real issue, the fundamental imbalance in how we related to each other. I'm not going to sue anyone, I said finally, but I am going to establish some boundaries that should have been in place long ago. What does that mean? Mother asked warily. I took a deep breath, knowing that what I was about to say would forever change our family dynamic. It means I'm stepping back from the constant expectation that I'll support Eleanor financially whenever she needs it, from the family pattern of making me the practical one while she gets to be the creative spirit who needs protection, from your assumption that I'll simply accept whatever decisions you make, regardless of how they affect me. Mother scoffed. Don't be ridiculous, Olivia. We're family. Yes, we are, I agreed. And families should treat each other with respect. That includes respecting my right to be included in significant decisions and acknowledging when you've hurt. Eleanor looked genuinely distressed. Olivia, please, we can work this out. We can, I said, but not today, and not by pretending this was acceptable. I need some time and space to process everything that's happened. I turned to leave, then paused in the doorway of the kitchen that had been the heart of our family. Home. I'm not cutting you out of my life. I'm just establishing that my feelings and interests matter too. When you're ready to acknowledge that, we can talk about moving forward. As I walked through the house toward the front door, I heard my mother's indignant voice. She'll come around. She always does. But this time, I knew I wouldn't. Something fundamental had shifted, and there would be no going back to the family dynamic I had accepted for so long. Stepping outside into the evening air, I felt a strange mixture of grief and liberation. The grief was for the family relationship I had believed in, one of mutual respect and consideration. The liberation came from finally acknowledging that this relationship had existed more in my imagination than in reality. As I drove away from Oak Ridge Manor, I realized that while I couldn't control what my mother and sister had done, I could control my response to it. For the first time in my life, I was choosing my own well-being over the family expectation that I would simply adapt and accommodate. It wasn't about the house anymore. It was about reclaiming my voice and my value within my own family story. The days following my confrontation at Oak Ridge unfolded in a predictable pattern. First came the barrage of messages, Mother's terse texts expressing disappointment in my dramatic behavior, Eleanor's lengthy voicemails alternating between apology and justification, even calls from extended family members who had somehow been informed that I was causing problems over Eleanor's house. I responded to none of them. For the first time in my life, I allowed myself the space to process my feelings without immediately managing everyone else's reactions. This wasn't about punishing them or creating drama. It was about honoring my own experience before rushing to smooth things over as I'd always done. At work, I threw myself into client portfolios and market analyses, finding comfort in the clarity of numbers and projections. My colleague Morgan noticed my distraction during our weekly strategy meeting. "Everything okay, Olivia?" she asked as we gathered our materials afterward. "You seem a million miles away." I hesitated, unused to discussing personal matters in the workplace. But Morgan and I had collaborated for nearly 6 years, and her straightforward approach had always been refreshing. "Family issues," I admitted. "My mother transferred our family estate to my sister without telling me. I just found out last." "Weak." Morgan's eyebrows shot up. "Seriously? Well, that's a significant oversight." "Oversight implies it was accidental," I said, organizing files with more force than necessary. This was quite deliberate. What are you going to do? The question hung between us. In the past, my answer would have been automatic. Find a way to accept it, maintain family harmony, be the bigger person. But something had fundamentally shifted inside me. I'm not sure yet, I replied honestly, but I'm not going to pretend it didn't happen or that it was somehow acceptable. Morgan nodded thoughtfully. You know, I went through something similar with my brother a few years ago over my grandmother's antique collection. Not nearly the same value as a house, but the principle was similar. What happened? I asked, genuinely curious. We didn't speak for 8 months, she said with remarkable casualness. It was actually the healthiest thing that could have happened. By the time we reconnected, the dynamic had completely reset. The idea of 8 months without contact with my family both terrified and intrigued me. My entire life had been structured around being the responsible daughter, the supportive sister, the reliable family member who could always be counted on to maintain peace. I'm not sure I know how to do that, I admitted. Morgan smiled. Nobody does at first, but sometimes space is the only thing that allows new patterns to emerge. That evening, I returned to my apartment and really looked at it with fresh eyes. I had always viewed it as a temporary arrangement, practical, convenient for work, but not a true home. In the back of my mind, I had carried the assumption that Oak Ridge would always be there, the family anchor regardless of where my career took me. Now that assumption was gone, along with the inheritance I had taken for granted. The financial impact was significant. Oak Ridge represented not just sentimental value but substantial monetary worth that would have provided long-term security and options for my future. But as I moved through my living space, touching the items I had carefully selected over the years, I realized something important. I had been building my own home all along, piece by piece, choice by choice. The mid-century reading chair discovered at an estate sale, the hand-blown glass vase from a trip to Seattle, the collection of financial history books carefully arranged on built-in shelves. This wasn't a temporary stopping place. It was a reflection of who I was beyond the family identity I had accepted for so long. I poured a glass of wine and settled onto my balcony, watching the city lights emerge as dusk fell. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a future completely of my own making, unbound by family expectations or patterns. The ringing of my phone interrupted this rare moment of peace. Eleanor's name flashed on the screen. After a moment's hesitation, I answered. Olivia, thank God, she said, relief evident in her voice. I've been trying to reach you for days. I needed some space, I replied simply. I understand, but we need to talk about this. Mom's upset, the kids keep asking about you, and I hate this tension between us. The familiar pull of family obligation tugged at me, the expectation that I would set aside my own feelings to restore harmony. But Morgan's words echoed in my mind. Sometimes space is the only thing that allows new patterns to emerge. I'm not ready to pretend everything is fine, I said firmly. What happened was wrong, Eleanor, and rushing to smooth things over won't address the underlying issues. So you're just going to stay angry forever? Her frustration was evident. That doesn't solve anything. I'm not trying to punish you, I explained. I'm establishing that my feelings and interests matter too. For too long, I've accepted being an afterthought in family decisions because it was easier than causing conflict. That's not fair, Eleanor protested. You've always been the favorite. Mom and Dad were so proud of your achievements, your sensible career, your independence. Do you have any idea what it's like living in the shadow of someone who never makes mistakes? Her words took me by surprise. Is that really how you see it? Of course. You were the golden child, Olivia. Perfect grades, perfect career, perfect life. I was always the one who needed help, who couldn't quite measure up. I laughed, though there was no humor in it. While I was envying your freedom to pursue your passions, your ability to ask for help when you needed it, your special bond with Mom. The line went quiet for a moment as we both absorbed this revelation. We've never really talked about this, have we? Eleanor finally said, her voice softer. About how we actually experience our family. No, I agreed. We've just played the roles assigned to us since childhood. The responsible one and the creative one, she said. Mom's practical daughter and her sensitive artist. Those labels have shaped everything, I observed. Including how we've handled this situation with Oak Ridge. Eleanor sighed. I didn't think about how it would affect you. Honestly, I was so relieved to have a solution to my housing problem that I didn't question Mom's approach. And Mom never considered that I might have feelings about it because I'm supposed to be the rational one who doesn't get emotional about these things, I added. Another silence fell between us, but it felt different. Contemplative, rather, than tense. I can't undo the transfer, Eleanor said eventually. The paperwork is finalized and the kids are settled in school here. I'm not asking you to move out, I clarified. This isn't about punishing you or the children. It's about acknowledging that something fundamentally unfair happened and finding a way forward that respects all of us. What would that look like? To you, she asked, and I was struck by the genuine curiosity in her voice. The question caught me off guard. No one in my family had ever asked what I wanted or needed. It had always been assumed that I would adapt to whatever arrangement benefited everyone else. I need time to think about that, I admitted. But the starting point is acknowledgement. Mom needs to recognize that making this decision without consulting me was wrong, regardless of her intentions. She won't see it that way, Eleanor warned. You know how she is. Once she decides something is for the best, she can't imagine any other perspective. Then we have a fundamental problem, I replied. Because I'm no longer willing to accept being excluded from decisions that affect me simply because Mom thinks she knows best. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. I never realized how much this pattern has shaped our family. Mom decides, I accept her help, you accommodate both of us. And none of us questions the dynamic because it's so familiar, I added. So what now? Eleanor asked. Where do we go from here? I thought about Morgan's advice and my own emerging clarity about what I needed. I think we need that space, I mentioned. Not cutting ties, but a reset. Time for new patterns to become possible. That's hard for me to accept, Eleanor admitted. I've always relied on you being there no matter what. And that's exactly why it's necessary, I explained, gently. Our relationship can't be healthy if it's based on that kind of one-sided dependence. After our call ended, I sat with a strange mixture of sadness and hope. The conversation with Eleanor had been more honest than any we'd had in years, perhaps, ever. The familiar patterns had momentarily shifted, creating space for something potentially healthier to emerge. The next morning, I received an email from Mr. Bennett, the lawyer who had initially informed me about the property transfer. His message was brief but intriguing. Ms. Caldwell, some information has come to my attention regarding your father's estate planning that may be relevant to your current situation. Would you be available to meet at your convenience? I scheduled an appointment for the following afternoon, curious but cautious about getting my hopes up. Whatever this information might be, I had already begun the more important work of reclaiming my voice within my family system. As I prepared for bed that night, my phone chimed with a text from Eleanor. I talked to Mom. Didn't go well. She doesn't understand why either of us is making such a fuss. But I want you to know I hear you, and I'm sorry for my part in all this. Take the time you need. We'll be here when you're ready. It was a small step, but significant. The first acknowledgement that my feelings were valid and my request for space was reasonable. Perhaps, I thought as I drifted toward sleep, this painful situation would ultimately lead to something better than what we'd had before. Relationships built on mutual respect rather than rigid roles and unexamined patterns. The painful gift of this conflict was already becoming clear. The opportunity to redefine myself beyond the limited identity I had accepted for so long within my family system. The law offices of Bennett and Associates occupied the 15th floor of a glass tower, downtown, offering sweeping views of the city skyline. As I was led through the reception area to Mr. Bennett's office, I maintained the composed demeanor I'd cultivated throughout my professional career, despite the uncertainty churning beneath the surface. Andrew Bennett rose from behind an imposing, mahogany desk as his assistant showed me in. He was younger than I had expected from his voice on the phone, perhaps mid-40s, with salt and pepper hair and wire-rimmed glasses. The office was classically appointed, with leather-bound law books lining built-in shelves and framed credentials adorning the walls. "Ms. Caldwell, thank you for coming," he said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. "Can I offer you coffee? Or water?" "Water would be fine, thank you," I replied, smoothing my skirt as I sat down. I had come directly from the office, still dressed in the charcoal suit that served as a kind of armor in my professional life. Once his assistant had delivered water and departed, closing the door behind her, Mr. Bennett settled into his chair and regarded me with a thoughtful expression. "I appreciate your meeting with me on such short notice," he began. "As I mentioned in my email, I've come across some information that may be relevant to your situation with Oak Ridge Manor." "I'm curious to hear what that might be," I said carefully, though I should clarify that I haven't decided to pursue any legal action regarding the property transfer. Bennett nodded. "I understand. What I'm about to share isn't necessarily grounds for legal challenge, but I believe it's information you should have." He opened a file folder on his desk. "I wasn't your father's primary attorney. That would have been Gerald Mackenzie at Mackenzie & Powell. However, I did handle some specialized estate planning for William Caldwell approximately 8 years ago, shortly after his diagnosis." The mention of my father's illness, the aggressive cancer that had taken him within months of discovery, sent a familiar pang through my chest. I wasn't aware that he consulted any attorneys other than Mr. Mackenzie. "It wasn't unusual," Bennett assured me. "Gerald handled the main estate, but your father came to me specifically for some additional arrangements he wanted to make privately." He removed several documents from the folder. "Your father established a separate trust that wasn't included in the primary estate plan. According to these documents, he purchased an investment property in Harbor Springs that was placed in this trust, with you named as the sole beneficiary." I blinked in surprise. "Harbor Springs? You mean the coastal area?" Bennett nodded. "Yes. It's a historical property, a former lighthouse keeper's residence that's been converted into a home. Your father purchased it in 2015, approximately 1 year before his passing." "I had no idea," I said, struggling to process this information. "Why wouldn't he have told me about this?" According to my notes from our meetings, William was concerned about family dynamics. He expressed that while the family estate would be shared equally between his daughters, he wanted to ensure you had something that was exclusively yours, something that couldn't be redistributed or influenced by other family members. The implication was clear. My father had anticipated exactly the kind of situation that had now occurred with Oak Ridge Manor. The terms of the trust specified that you were to be informed on your 40th birthday, which is still 2 years away, Bennett continued. "However, given the current circumstances with the family estate, I felt an ethical obligation to inform you now." He slid a folder across the desk to me. "These are copies of the trust documents and information about the property. The original lighthouse dates back to 1887, though the residence has been modernized while maintaining its historical character. The property includes 3 acres of land with substantial waterfront." I opened the folder with trembling hands, finding photographs of a white clapboard house attached to a picturesque lighthouse tower, perched on rocky shoreline with the vast expanse of water stretching beyond. The interior shots revealed warm, wood floors, exposed beam ceilings, and windows that captured spectacular water views from every room. The property has been maintained by a management company that handles several historical vacation rentals in the area, Bennett explained. Your father arranged for all maintenance costs and property taxes to be covered by the trust until the property transferred to you. The income from seasonal rentals has been reinvested, creating a maintenance fund that now stands at approximately $175,000. My mind raced, trying to absorb this unexpected development. What's the value of the property itself? The most recent assessment placed it at approximately $8 million, though waterfront properties in that area have appreciated significantly in the past few years. A current market valuation would likely be higher. I stared at the photographs, imagining my father walking through these rooms, standing on that shoreline, making these arrangements in secret during the final months of his life. He had created this safety net for me without anyone else's knowledge, a final gift that seemed to reach across time with perfect timing. "Why are you sharing this now?" I asked, looking up at Bennett. "The trust specifies my 40th birthday." He removed his glasses, polishing them thoughtfully. "The purpose of the age stipulation was to ensure the property would be protected until you reached a certain life stage. Your father was quite specific that he wanted you to have options beyond the family dynamics at Oak Ridge. Given what's transpired with the manor, I believe the intent of the trust is best served by informing you now." "Does my mother know about this?" Bennett shook his head. "No. William was explicit that this arrangement was to remain confidential. Catherine Caldwell is not mentioned anywhere in these documents." A complex wave of emotions washed over me. Gratitude toward my father for his foresight, sadness that we had never discussed this before his death, and a strange sense of vindication that he had understood family dynamics clearly enough to create this contingency. "There's one more thing," Bennett added, reaching for another document. "The Harbor Springs property is valuable, certainly, but there's an additional component to the trust. Your father established an investment account with an initial deposit of $500,000. That account has been professionally managed for the past 8 years and now stands at just over $2 million. I took a sharp breath. Combined with the property value, my father had effectively balanced the scales without anyone's knowledge, creating an inheritance for me that closely matched the value of Oak Ridge Manor. "My father never gave any indication of these arrangements," I said, still processing. "The revelation." Bennett smiled slightly. "He described you as extraordinarily capable, but sometimes too accommodating of others' needs at your own expense. He wanted to ensure you had resources that were exclusively yours, regardless of family circumstances." I felt tears threatening, and took a moment to compose myself. My father had seen me clearly, had recognized patterns I was only now beginning to acknowledge. "What do I need to do to take possession of the property and accounts?" I asked finally. "As trustee, I can initiate the transfer immediately. There's some paperwork to complete, but the process is straightforward. You could have access to everything within 2 weeks." As I left Bennett's office an hour later, signed documents in my portfolio and keys to the Harbor Springs property in my purse, I felt a profound shift in my perspective. The financial impact of losing Oak Ridge had been unexpectedly neutralized, but the more significant change was internal. My father's final gift wasn't just the property and investments, it was the message behind them. He had seen the family dynamics clearly enough to create this contingency, this safety net that would ensure I couldn't be completely disenfranchised. In doing so, he had affirmed my worth within the family in a way that transcended the current conflict. Instead of returning to my office, I found myself walking to a nearby park, needing space to absorb the implications of what I'd learned. I sat on a bench overlooking a small pond, watching as afternoon sunlight filtered through the trees, creating dancing patterns on the water's surface. For the first time since learning about Oak Ridge, I felt my anger giving way to something more productive, a determination to reshape my family relationships on healthier terms, regardless of property or inheritance. The lighthouse property represented more than financial equity. It was a reminder that I deserved respect and consideration, that my place in the family wasn't contingent on always accommodating others' needs. My phone vibrated with a text from Eleanor. Mom is hosting Sunday dinner this weekend. I know you said you needed space, but we miss you. No pressure, just an invitation. In the past, I would have accepted immediately, eager to restore harmony regardless of whether underlying issues had been addressed. Now, I recognize the subtle pressure in the message. The implication that my absence was creating hardship for others, that the appropriate response was to set aside my own needs and resume normal family functions. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I allowed myself to imagine alternative possibilities. What if I visited the lighthouse property instead this weekend? What if I began establishing my life around my own priorities rather than family expectations? What if I approached relationships, with my mother, with Eleanor, with everyone, from a position of wholeness rather than accommodation? The realization of my father's private arrangements had shifted something fundamental in my understanding. I wasn't the overlooked daughter who had been unfairly deprived of inheritance. I was the daughter whose father had seen her clearly enough to create a path to independence that couldn't be undermined by family dynamics. As I walked back to my office, I composed a response to Eleanor. I appreciate the invitation, but I'll be traveling this weekend. I'm not ready for family gatherings yet. When I am, we'll need to have real conversations about patterns that need to change, not just resume as if nothing happened. I hope you understand. Her reply came quickly. I do understand. Take the time you need. Things can't go back to how they were anyway, not after everything that's happened. That evening, I began researching Harbor Springs, learning about the coastal community where my unexpected inheritance was located. I found myself drawn to images of the shoreline, imagining early mornings watching the sunrise over the water, evenings spent on the wraparound porch as stars emerged above the horizon. The property offered more than financial value or residential options. It represented possibility, the chance to define my life on my own terms rather than in relation to family expectations or established patterns. I called Morgan, my colleague who had shared her own family estrangement experience, and explained the unexpected development. That's incredible, she said when I finished. Your father essentially created a backup plan to ensure you couldn't be completely disenfranchised. It feels like he's reaching across time, telling me he saw what I'm only now beginning to recognize about our family dynamics, I admitted. So what will you do now? Morgan asked. Confront your mother with this information? The question gave me pause. The temptation to use this revelation as vindication was strong, to present it as evidence that I hadn't been forgotten after all, that my father had valued me enough to create this secret provision. But such an approach would merely continue the pattern of seeking validation from a family system that had consistently marginalized my needs. No, I said finally. I'm going to visit the property this weekend. I need to see it for myself, to understand what possibilities it might hold. The conversations with my family will happen when I'm ready, from a position of clarity rather than reaction. That sounds remarkably healthy, Morgan observed with approval. Creating your path forward before engaging with the family drama. As we ended the call, I felt a sense of purpose I hadn't experienced since learning about Oak Ridge. The path forward wasn't about fighting for recognition within a dysfunctional system, but about building something new that honored my own values and priorities. My father's final gift wasn't just financial security, it was the freedom to redefine myself, beyond the limited role I had accepted for so long, to become the author of my own story rather than a supporting character in someone else's. The drive to Harbor Springs took just over 4 hours, carrying me north away from the city through gradually changing landscapes. Urban density gave way to suburbs, then to farmland, and finally to the thick forests of northern Michigan. I had left early Saturday morning, watching the sunrise in my rearview mirror as I headed toward an inheritance I hadn't known existed a week earlier. I had deliberately chosen to make this journey alone, despite Eleanor's text suggesting she might accompany me for moral support. This first encounter with my father's final gift needed to be a private experience, unmediated by family expectations or reactions. My navigation system guided me through the charming town center of Harbor Springs, with its Victorian-era buildings and bustling weekend activity, then along the coastline where elegant summer homes alternated with protected natural areas. The road narrowed as it curved along the shoreline, eventually turning onto a private drive marked only with the number 1887, the year the lighthouse was built. The property revealed itself gradually. First came the glimpse of white clapboard through the trees, then the distinctive silhouette of the lighthouse tower against the vast blue expanse of water. As I parked in the small gravel area beside the house, the full impact of what my father had secured for me came into focus. The lighthouse keeper's residence was more substantial than it had appeared in photographs. A two-story structure with a wraparound porch, connected to the lighthouse tower by a short covered walkway. The white paint gleamed in the midday sun, contrasting with black shutters and a red door that matched the top of the lighthouse. The property management representative, Claire Donovan, was waiting on the porch as I arrived. She was a trim woman in her 50s, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and the weathered complexion of someone who spent considerable time outdoors. "Ms. Caldwell, welcome to Point Haven," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Claire. We've been maintaining the property since your father purchased it." "Point Haven," I repeated, testing the name. "I didn't know it had one." Claire smiled. "That's what your father named it. He said it was meant to be exactly that, a haven." The significance wasn't lost on me. My father had created this sanctuary years ago, anticipating that I might one day need precisely this, a haven of my own. "Did you know my father well?" I asked as Claire unlocked the bright red door. "I wouldn't say well, but we met several times during the purchase and renovation process. He was very specific about maintaining the historical character while creating a comfortable living space." She paused, seeming to consider her next words carefully. "He mentioned it was for his daughter, that it would be a surprise someday." I swallowed against the sudden tightness in my throat. It certainly was that. The interior of the home was a perfect balance of historical charm and contemporary comfort. Wide plank pine floors had been restored to a warm honey color. The original brick fireplace dominated the living room, now flanked by built-in bookshelves. Windows stretched nearly from floor to ceiling, capturing spectacular views of the water from every main room. "The previous owners completed most of the historical restoration," Claire explained as she led me through the house. "Your father focused on updating systems and creating a more functional living space. New kitchen, updated bathrooms, efficient heating and cooling." The kitchen featured soapstone counters and classic cabinetry that respected the home's origins while providing modern functionality. A cozy dining area occupied a windowed alcove with panoramic water views. Upstairs, 3 bedrooms each offered unique perspectives of the surrounding landscape, one facing the water, another overlooking a garden area, and the master suite with views in both directions. "The lighthouse tower itself has been converted into a studio space," Claire continued, leading me through the connecting walkway. "Your father thought it would make an excellent home office or creative area." The circular room at the base of the lighthouse had been thoughtfully designed with built-in desks and storage. A spiral staircase led upward to the lantern room, which had been preserved with its original Fresnel lens, though it was no longer functional as a navigational aid. Standing in that glass-enclosed space, with a 360-degree view of water, coastline, and sky, I felt a profound connection to my father that transcended the property itself. He had chosen this place, this lighthouse, as my inheritance. The symbolism wasn't subtle. A beacon, a guide, a structure designed to help navigate challenging waters. The property has been very popular as a vacation rental, Claire noted. As we return to the main house, we've maintained a careful schedule to prevent wear and tear, limiting it to no more than 20 weeks of rental annually. The income has more than covered maintenance costs. Will the rental commitments be an issue if I decide to use the property myself? I asked, already imagining weekends spent here, perhaps eventually longer periods. Not at all. Your father's instructions were clear that whenever you took possession, your needs would take priority. We have a flexible cancellation policy with guests for exactly this reason. After Claire departed, leaving me with keys, security codes, and a detailed property manual, I wandered through the house alone, absorbing its details more fully. Each room revealed thoughtful touches that spoke to my father's consideration. The window seat with perfectly positioned reading light in the upstairs bedroom, the kitchen drawers organized exactly as I would have arranged them, the selection of regional history books on the living room shelves. In the master bedroom, I discovered a small safe tucked into the closet. Using the combination Bennett had provided, I opened it to find an envelope with my name written in my father's distinctive handwriting. My hands trembled slightly as I broke the seal. The letter inside was dated just 3 weeks before his death. My dearest Olivia, if you're reading this, then Andrew Bennett has shared with you the arrangements I've made. I had planned for this moment to come on your 40th birthday, but Bennett has my permission to accelerate the timeline if circumstances warrant it. This property is yours alone, not part of the family estate, not subject to your mother's influence or your sister's needs. I've observed over the years how willingly you set aside your own interests to maintain family harmony, how often your considerable contributions go unacknowledged because they're simply expected. Point Haven represents my hope for you, that you will claim space in this world that is entirely yours, defined by your choices rather than others' expectations. The lighthouse seems particularly fitting, a structure designed to guide safe passage through difficult waters. I regret that I won't be there when you discover this place. I would have loved to see your expression, to walk these rooms with you and explain the choices that went into creating this sanctuary. But perhaps this way is better, allowing you to experience it without my presence influencing your response. Know that this gift comes with no expectations or conditions. Use it, sell it, rent it, whatever serves your life best. My only hope is that it reminds you that you were seen and valued, even when family dynamics might suggest otherwise. With enduring love and pride in the woman you've become, Dad. I sat on the edge of the bed, tears flowing freely as I read the letter twice more. In these words, written during his final days, my father had acknowledged what I had only recently begun to recognize: the unhealthy patterns that had defined our family relationships, my habitual self-sacrifice for others' benefit, the lack of recognition for my contributions. Most importantly, he had taken concrete action to provide me with options beyond those patterns. This lighthouse wasn't just property or financial security, it was tangible proof that someone had truly seen me, understood my position within the family system, and created a pathway toward something healthier. I spent the remainder of the afternoon exploring the grounds, the carefully maintained gardens, the stone pathway leading down to a small private beach area, the covered deck positioned perfectly for sunset viewing. As evening approached, I sat on that deck with a glass of wine, watching as the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the water in shades of gold and crimson. My phone had been uncharacteristically silent since arriving at Point Haven, either due to spotty service or perhaps my family respecting my request for space. Either way, I welcomed the quiet, the opportunity to process this unexpected development, without external input or pressure. For the first time since learning about Oak Ridge, I felt genuine peace about the situation. The anger and hurt hadn't disappeared entirely, but they had been transformed by this discovery. My father's arrangements had effectively neutralized the financial impact of my mother's actions, though the emotional breach would require more time to heal. As darkness fell and stars began appearing above the water, I made a decision. I would spend Sunday exploring Harbor Springs, getting to know the community surrounding Point Haven. Then, instead of returning to the city immediately, I would extend my stay through the week, working remotely from the Lighthouse studio. The physical distance would provide continued space from family pressures while allowing me to experience this place as more than a weekend retreat. I composed a brief email to my team at work, arranging for my remote schedule, then texted Eleanor. I've decided to stay in Harbor Springs through the week. Found something unexpected that I need time to process. Will explain when I return. Her response came quickly. Sounds mysterious. Take the time you need. Things are calmer here. Mom's still upset, but no longer trying to convince everyone. You're being unreasonable. The subtle shift in tone was noteworthy. Instead of attempting to draw me back into the family system, Eleanor was acknowledging my right to space and independence. Perhaps our honest conversation had initiated changes beyond my own boundaries. That night, I slept in the master bedroom, windows cracked to let in the sound of waves against the shoreline. For the first time in weeks, my sleep was deep and untroubled, free from the circular thoughts that had plagued me since learning about Oak Ridge. Morning arrived with spectacular clarity, sunlight streaming through east-facing windows, illuminating the room with golden light. I made coffee in the well-appointed kitchen and took it to the deck, watching fishing boats move across the horizon as the day began. In this peaceful setting, I found myself considering the path forward with new perspective. The lighthouse property had fundamentally altered the power dynamic in my family situation. No longer was I the disinherited daughter seeking recognition or compensation. I now stood on equal financial footing, my future secured through my father's foresight. This changed reality created options I hadn't previously considered. I could maintain distance from my family indefinitely if necessary, building a life centered around my own priorities rather than family obligations. I could engage from a position of strength rather than perceived disadvantage. I could even choose magnanimity, secure in the knowledge that my worth wasn't dependent on their validation. As I considered these possibilities, I realized that financial equity wasn't the most significant outcome of my father's arrangements. More important was the psychological freedom it provided, the concrete evidence that I deserved consideration, that my needs mattered, that someone had valued me enough to create this safety net. With this foundation in place, I could approach the necessary conversations with my mother and sister not from a position of injury or grievance, but from genuine strength and clarity about what healthy relationships would require moving forward. The lighthouse stood as both sanctuary and symbol, a beacon guiding me toward a future defined by authentic choice rather than obligation or expectation. Whatever path I chose from this point forward would be illuminated by this new understanding of my worth, independent of family validation or approval. For the first time in my adult life, I felt truly free to determine my own course, to navigate according to my own values and priorities rather than the patterns established in childhood. The inheritance that truly mattered wasn't Oak Ridge Manor, or even Point Haven itself, but this newfound clarity about my right to inhabit space in the world defined by my own choosing. The week at Point Haven passed with a rhythm entirely different from my structured city life. Mornings began with coffee. On the deck, watching the lake's shifting moods, sometimes mirror calm, other days dancing with whitecaps under brisk winds. I established a makeshift office in the lighthouse tower, positioning my laptop at the built-in desk where windows on 3 sides provided expansive views and abundant natural light. Remote work proved surprisingly productive in this environment. Client consultations conducted via video calls gained an unexpected element as several commented on my interesting background, leading to brief explanations about my temporary workspace. These conversations often shifted something subtle in client relationships, a humanizing element that stood in contrast to the formal office setting they were accustomed to. Between meetings and portfolio reviews, I explored Harbor Springs, gradually mapping its contours in my mind. The town combined the charm of a historic coastal community with surprisingly sophisticated amenities. Excellent restaurants, thoughtfully curated shops, a small but impressive art gallery featuring regional artists. Walking the harbor boardwalk, one evening, I found myself genuinely considering what life might look like if I spent more time here. On Thursday, Claire introduced me to Preston Hayes, the caretaker who maintained the Point Haven grounds and handled minor repairs. Preston, a retired Coast Guard officer with weathered features and capable hands, had worked with my father during the renovation process. "Your dad was particular about preserving the historical elements," he told me as we walked the property. Perimeter. "Wouldn't let us take shortcuts on anything, even parts visitors would never see. Said integrity wasn't about appearance, but about knowing the foundation was solid." The comment resonated beyond its literal meaning. My father had created this place with integrity, both in construction and in purpose. While my mother's transfer of Oak Ridge had been conducted in secrecy, with deliberate exclusion and questionable motives, my father's arrangements for Point Haven reflected transparency of intention and genuine concern for my well-being. "Were you surprised when he purchased this property?" I asked Preston as we inspected the boathouse, a simple structure that housed a small motorboat and kayaks for tenant use. Preston adjusted his worn canvas hat thoughtfully. "Not really. He seemed a man who knew his mind from the start. Came up here 3 times before making an offer, walked every inch of the property, spent hours sitting on that deck just watching the water." He glanced at me. "Said it was for his daughter who needed a place that was hers alone. That made sense to me. Every person needs somewhere that belongs to them, where they can hear their own thoughts." By Friday, I had settled into a comfortable routine at Point Haven, so much so that the prospect of returning to the city on Sunday filled me with a curious reluctance. I extended my reservation for an additional week, adjusting my work schedule accordingly. The decision felt significant, not just a vacation extension, but a deliberate choice to remain in this space that represented independence and possibility. That evening, I received an unexpected call from Ryan Mackenzie, the son of my father's primary attorney and now a partner in his father's firm. "Olivia, I hope I'm not interrupting your evening," he began after I accepted the call. "I understand from Andrew Bennett that you've learned about the Point Haven property." "Yes," I confirmed, curious about the purpose of his call. "I'm actually staying there now." "I thought that might be the case. Bennett mentioned you'd taken possession." There was a moment's hesitation before he continued. "The reason I'm calling involves some additional information about your father's estate planning. That has recently come to my attention." My pulse quickened slightly. "What kind of information?" "It's somewhat sensitive and probably best discussed in person rather than over the phone. I understand you're in Harbor Springs currently, but when you return to the city, I'd appreciate if you could come into the office." The formal tone and vague reference to sensitive information triggered immediate concerns. "Ryan, if there's an issue with Point Haven or my father's arrangements, I'd prefer to know now." "There's no issue with Point Haven," he assured me quickly. "The property and trust are exactly as Bennett described them. This concerns other matters related to your father's intentions for Oak Ridge Manor." I moved from the kitchen to the deck, needing fresh air as I processed this cryptic statement. My mother has already transferred Oak Ridge to my sister. If there's something I should know about my father's intentions, it seems rather late. Ryan's sigh was audible through the phone. "I understand your frustration. Without going into details, over the phone, I can tell you that my father recently recovered some documents during our firm's digital archives upgrade. Correspondence from your father that impacts the current situation with Oak Ridge. I believe you'll find it significant." After ending the call with a promise to meet Ryan when I returned to the city, I sat on the deck watching darkness settle over the water, mind churning with possibilities. What documents could possibly matter now that Oak Ridge had been transferred? Was there some legal constraint my mother had overlooked? Some condition in my father's arrangements that might invalidate her actions? The uncertainty might have consumed my evening had Claire not arrived with an unexpected invitation. A group of year-round residents have a Friday tradition at the landing, she explained, referring to a dockside restaurant I'd noticed during my explorations. Nothing formal, just drinks and dinner, locals sharing news and stories. I thought you might enjoy meeting some of the community. The invitation offered welcome distraction from speculating about Ryan's cryptic call. I'd like that, I said, realizing I'd had minimal human interaction beyond work calls throughout the week. The landing proved to be exactly the kind of authentic local establishment I'd hoped to find. Rustic without being contrived, busy without being chaotic. Claire introduced me to her circle with simple directness. This is Olivia Caldwell, William. Caldwell's daughter. She's staying at Point Haven. The group, ranging from a retired university professor to the owner of the local hardware store, welcomed me without excessive curiosity or prying questions. Conversation flowed easily, covering local history, upcoming community events, and good-natured debates about the best fishing spots along the coast. Midway through dinner, Claire's husband Mark, a marine biologist who managed the local nature center, asked the question that had likely been on several minds. Will you be spending more time at Point Haven now that you've discovered it? The question was asked without agenda, simple curiosity, rather than the layered expectations I was accustomed to from family inquiries. I found myself answering with unexpected honesty. I'm considering it. This week has been clarifying. There's something about this place that provides perspective I've been missing. Nods around the table suggested understanding beyond my specific circumstances. The water does that, commented Elaine, the silver-haired professor emeritus. Changes your relationship with time. In the city, time is always rushing forward, demanding more. Here, the rhythms are different. Tides coming and going, seasons changing. Reminds you that not everything needs immediate resolution. Her observation articulated something I'd felt but hadn't named during my stay, the gradual unwinding of urgency that had characterized my approach to the Oak Ridge situation. Distance and the lighthouse setting had shifted my perspective from reactive to contemplative, creating space to consider longer horizons rather than immediate responses. Driving back to Point Haven after dinner, I found myself genuinely appreciating the community I'd glimpsed. These were people connected by choice rather than obligation, their relationships seemingly built on mutual respect rather than entrenched patterns or unspoken expectations. The contrast with my family dynamics was striking. Saturday morning brought an email from Eleanor with the subject line, "Update on Mom." The message was straightforward but revealing. Olivia, hope you're finding what you need in Harbor Springs, which I had to look up on a map. It looks beautiful. Things here have been evolving in your absence. Mom finally admitted yesterday that she should have discussed the Oak Ridge transfer with you before proceeding. Not quite an apology, but progress. I've been thinking a lot about our conversation and the patterns we talked about. You were right. We've all been playing assigned roles for so long that it became impossible to see alternatives. Your stepping back has created space for different interactions. Mom and I actually disagreed about something yesterday without her shutting down the conversation or me immediately deferring. Small steps, but meaningful. Take the time you need. When you're ready to talk, I am too. About Oak Ridge, about our relationship, about creating something healthier going forward. Eleanor. The email represented a significant shift from my sister's initial responses. Gone was the subtle pressure to return, the implication that my absence was creating hardship for others. In its place was acknowledgement of my perspective, and recognition that the family dynamic needed reconstruction, not just reconciliation. I composed a thoughtful reply, sharing limited information about Point Haven without revealing its full significance or financial implications. That conversation would come when I returned, in person rather than through digital communication. I expressed appreciation for her recognition of our unhealthy patterns and confirmed my intention to work toward more balanced relationships when I returned. The remainder of Saturday was spent on practical matters, reviewing the property maintenance schedule with Claire, discussing rental management options going forward, arranging for a small renovation to the kitchen that would improve functionality without compromising historical integrity. Each decision reinforced my connection to Point Haven, transforming it from unexpected inheritance to intentional investment. This place was becoming an extension of my identity, not in the entangled way Oak Ridge had been, where family legacy carried complex obligations, but as a clean expression of personal choice. Sunday morning dawned with perfect clarity, the water a brilliant blue beneath cloudless skies. I packed my belongings slowly, reluctant to leave despite knowing I would return soon. The lighthouse had worked its gentle magic over the past 9 days, providing not just physical sanctuary but psychological space to reimagine possibilities. Before departing, I climbed the spiral staircase to the lantern room one last time. Standing in that glass-enclosed space with 360-degree views, I thought about the lighthouse's original purpose: to guide vessels safely through difficult passages, to illuminate hidden dangers, to mark the way home. My father couldn't have chosen a more perfect metaphor for what I needed. Point Haven had become my beacon during a challenging transition, illuminating options I hadn't previously recognized and guiding me toward a future defined by conscious choice rather than inherited patterns. As I descended the stairs and prepared for the journey back to the city, I carried with me not just plans for the property, but a fundamental shift in perspective. The upcoming meeting with Ryan Mackenzie and inevitable conversations with my family no longer provoked anxiety. Whatever information awaited, whatever negotiations might be necessary, I would approach them from a position of clarity rather than reaction. The lighthouse had shown me that even in stormy conditions, with familiar landmarks obscured and usual paths disrupted, new directions remained possible with proper illumination. The light my father had provided wasn't just financial security, but the profound recognition that I deserved to navigate according to my own values rather than others' expectations. Driving away from Point Haven, watching the lighthouse recede in my rearview mirror, I felt not separation, but connection. To my father's legacy, to my own emerging clarity, to possibilities still unfolding. The beacon would remain, steady and constant, as I navigated the conversations and decisions ahead. The path forward wasn't about winning battles over property or inheritance, but about establishing relationships built on mutual respect, rather than entrenched patterns. Whether my mother and sister could participate in this reconstruction remained to be seen, but my own direction had become unmistakably clear in the light of my father's final gift. The law offices of Mackenzie and Powell occupied a historic building in the financial district, its limestone facade and brass fixtures speaking to established tradition. As I entered the marble-floored lobby on Monday afternoon, I carried myself with a confidence that felt both familiar and somehow different. The professional poise I'd cultivated throughout my career, now reinforced by a deeper personal certainty. Ryan. Mackenzie greeted me himself rather than sending an assistant, extending his hand with the precise formality that characterized the old guard legal establishment. Thank you for coming in, Olivia. I appreciate your making time so promptly after your return. Your call suggested this was important, I replied as he led me through the reception area toward a conference room rather than his office. I'm curious to learn what documents have suddenly become relevant after all this time. Ryan nodded, his expression carefully neutral. They emerged during our digital archives update. We've been converting older files to our new system, and in the process, some correspondence between your father and my father came to light that wasn't properly indexed in our previous database. The conference room was impeccably appointed, with a mahogany table, leather chairs, and discreet art on paneled walls. A folder sat centered on the table, alongside a laptop connected to a monitor mounted on the wall. Ryan indicated I should take a seat while he prepared to present the materials. "Before we begin," he said, settling into a chair across from me, "I want to clarify that neither my father nor I were aware of these documents until recently. Had we been, the current situation with Oak Ridge Manor might have developed quite differently." His disclaimer heightened my curiosity. "What exactly are we discussing, Ryan?" He opened the folder, revealing several printed emails and what appeared to be scanned handwritten notes. "Approximately 1 month before your father's passing, he and my father exchanged a series of communications regarding plans for Oak Ridge Manor. These were separate from the formal will and estate documents we had on file." Ryan turned the first document toward me, an email from my father to Gerald Mackenzie dated just 6 weeks before his death. "Gerald, following our discussion yesterday, I've given considerable thought to the Oak Ridge situation, while Catherine and I have agreed the property should pass to both daughters equally upon our deaths. I have growing concerns about whether this arrangement best serves everyone's interests long-term. Olivia and Eleanor have fundamentally different approaches to life and financial management. My observation over the years suggests joint ownership would likely create tension rather than the family unity Catherine envisions. Shared property requires shared decision-making, which has never been our family's strength. I'd like to explore alternatives that might provide more clearly defined outcomes while respecting both daughters' connections to the property. Perhaps separate trust arrangements similar to what we established with Bennett for the Harbor Springs property. Let's discuss options when you have a moment. William." I looked up from the document, processing its implications. My father was having doubts about the joint inheritance arrangement. Ryan nodded. "Yes, and those doubts evolved into a specific alternative plan, as you'll see in the subsequent communications." He turned to the next document, Gerald Mackenzie's response outlining several options for restructuring the Oak Ridge inheritance, followed by additional exchanges refining these possibilities. The final email in the sequence contained my father's decision. "Gerald, after reviewing the options you've presented, I believe the following arrangement would best address my concerns. 1. Catherine retains lifetime rights to Oak Ridge Manor. 2. Upon Catherine's eventual passing or voluntary relinquishment, Eleanor would receive exclusive ownership of Oak Ridge Manor itself and the surrounding 5 acres. 3. The remaining 35 acres of Oak Ridge property would be sold, with proceeds divided as follows: 70% to Olivia as compensation for not receiving the manor, 30% to Eleanor for property maintenance and upkeep of the manor. This arrangement acknowledges Eleanor's deeper emotional attachment to the house itself while ensuring Olivia receives fair financial consideration. It prevents the complications of joint ownership while honoring both daughters' place in the family legacy. Please draft the necessary documents for my review. Given my declining health, I'd like to finalize these arrangements within the next 2 weeks if possible. William. The implications were clear. My father had developed a specific plan for Oak Ridge that differed significantly from both the original will and my mother's unilateral actions. His solution had acknowledged our different relationships with the property while ensuring equitable financial outcomes. These are the instructions my father was working from, I asked, scanning the document again. The plan he intended to implement before his death? Ryan's expression held genuine regret. Yes. According to notes in the file, my father had begun drafting the necessary documents, but they remained uncompleted when your father passed somewhat more suddenly than expected. In the aftermath, with the original will still legally binding and your mother as executor, these preliminary discussions were unfortunately overlooked. Overlooked, I repeated, the word inadequate for the significant consequences of this administrative failure. So my father had specifically decided that Eleanor should eventually have the house, but with substantial financial compensation to me from the sale of the additional acreage. That appears to be his clear intention based on these documents, Ryan confirmed. While not legally executed, the instructions are explicit and detailed. I sat back in the leather chair, absorbing this revelation. My father had anticipated exactly the problems that had now emerged, the differing attachments. Eleanor and I had to Oakridge, the challenges of joint ownership, the need for equitable but not identical inheritance. He had devised a solution that respected these differences while maintaining financial fairness. "Does my mother know about these documents?" I asked. "Not yet. Given the personal nature of the situation and your father's clear concern for both daughter's interests, I thought it appropriate to speak with you first before approaching Catherine." The consideration was appreciated, but raised obvious questions. "What exactly are you suggesting we do with this information?" "The property transfer to Eleanor is already complete." Ryan leaned forward slightly. "The transfer your mother executed covers the entire Oakridge property, both the manor house with its immediate grounds and the additional acreage your father specified should be sold with proceeds primarily benefiting you. While the house transfer might align with your father's ultimate intentions, the transfer of all surrounding property directly contradicts his expressed wishes." "And this gives me some legal recourse?" I asked, professional training automatically assessing practical implications. "It provides significant leverage, certainly. These documents clearly establish your father's intentions regarding the property division. While not formally executed as legal instruments, they represent compelling evidence of his wishes that a court would likely find persuasive." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "However, legal action isn't the only possibility. These documents could serve as the basis for negotiation, a way to honor your father's intentions without protracted litigation." The suggestion resonated with the perspective I'd gained at Point Haven. Weeks earlier, learning about these documents might have triggered an immediate push for legal redress, a way to challenge my mother's unilateral action and force recognition of my interests. Now, I saw a different potential outcome. "May I have copies of these documents?" I asked. Ryan nodded, sliding a folder toward me. "I've prepared complete copies for your records. I should note that while we discussed confidentiality regarding Point Haven earlier, these documents presenting your father's intentions for Oakridge don't carry the same restrictions. I am ethically obligated to share this information with all relevant parties, including your mother." "I understand," I replied, appreciating his transparency. "How do you suggest proceeding?" "I believe a family meeting with legal representation present would be appropriate. My father would be willing to facilitate, given his long relationship with your family and his direct involvement in these discussions with William." As I left the Mackenzie and Powell offices 30 minutes later, the folder of documents secure, in my portfolio, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Vindication, certainly. Confirmation that my father had intended equitable treatment despite my mother's subsequent actions. But also a sense of possibility rather than grievance, an opportunity to implement a solution that honored my father's thoughtful planning. Instead of returning to my apartment, I found myself driving to a small park overlooking the river that wound through the city. Sitting on a bench beneath maple trees beginning their autumn transformation, I reviewed the documents again, absorbing their full significance. My father had seen our family dynamics with remarkable clarity. He had recognized Eleanor's emotional attachment to Oakridge itself, her connection to the physical space where she had always felt most secure. He had equally understood my more practical relationship with the property, appreciating its value and legacy, but not needing daily connection to its rooms and grounds. His solution had been elegantly balanced. Eleanor would have the home she loved. I would have financial resources reflective of my inheritance share. Neither of us would be entangled in joint ownership that would inevitably create conflict given our different priorities and approaches. Yet my mother had disregarded this careful planning, transferring everything to Eleanor without consultation or compensation. Whether from misguided protectiveness toward my sister or fundamental disregard for my interests, her actions had created precisely the family fracture my father had sought to prevent. The revelation of these documents changed the fundamental nature of the situation. No longer was I simply the excluded daughter seeking recognition. I now stood as the representative of my father's clear intentions, intentions that had been overlooked and overridden. This position offered power, but also responsibility. I could use these documents as weapons in a family battle, forcing compliance through legal pressure. Or I could offer them as a pathway to the solution my father had envisioned, a way for all of us to honor his wishes while moving forward with healthier family dynamics. The choice seemed clear, informed by my time at Point Haven and the perspective it had provided. My goal wasn't to win a family power struggle, but to establish relationships based on mutual respect rather than entrenched patterns. These documents provided leverage not for victory, but for transformation. I texted Eleanor, "Back in the city, some important information has emerged regarding Dad's intentions for Oak Ridge. Would like to meet with you, just us, before any larger family discussions. Tomorrow evening possible?" Her response came quickly. "Yes. My place at 7? Kids will be at their father's." Next, I drafted a brief professional email to Ryan Mackenzie. "Thank you for sharing these important documents. I would like to discuss them with my sister privately before proceeding with any formal family meeting. I'll be in touch regarding next steps after our conversation." As the afternoon sun filtered through maple leaves, casting dappled shadows across the pathway, I reflected on how dramatically circumstances had shifted in just 2 weeks. From discovering my mother's unilateral action regarding Oak Ridge, to learning of my father's unexpected provision of Point Haven, to now uncovering his specific intentions for dividing the family estate, each revelation had altered my understanding and options. Yet the most significant change wasn't external, but internal. My evolving perspective on what truly mattered in this situation. The financial implications remained important, certainly, but more essential was the opportunity to reshape family relationships that had been dysfunctional for decades. My father had attempted this transformation through property arrangements, planning carefully to prevent exactly the conflict that had now emerged. Though those plans had gone unimplemented during his lifetime, they still offered a blueprint for resolution, not just of the property dispute, but of the underlying patterns that had created it. As I gathered my things and walked back toward my car, a sense of clarity and purpose accompanied me. Tomorrow's conversation with Eleanor would be challenging, but potentially transformative. Rather than approaching it from a position of injury or grievance, I would offer the opportunity for us both to honor our father's wishes while establishing new patterns of mutual respect. The path forward wasn't about winning or losing, but about creating relationships worthy of my father's thoughtful care. That, I realized, would be his true legacy. Not the properties themselves, but the possibility of family connections built on understanding rather than obligation, on recognition rather than resentment, on genuine respect rather than rigid roles. With this clarity guiding me, I drove home to prepare for a conversation that might finally break the patterns of a lifetime. Eleanor's townhouse reflected her artistic sensibilities. Walls painted in warm terracotta and sage green, eclectic furniture arranged for conversation rather than symmetry, and her own paintings displayed alongside collected pieces from local artists. Though smaller than Oak Ridge, the space carried her distinctive touch in every corner. She greeted me with a tentative hug, the first physical contact we'd had since our confrontation at the family estate. "You look different," she observed, stepping back to study me. "More. I don't know. Centered?" 2 weeks at a lighthouse will do that, I replied with a small smile. It was exactly what I needed. Eleanor led me to her kitchen, where a bottle of wine was already open and breathing on the counter. The space was characteristically chaotic but inviting. Cookbooks stacked beside pottery bowls, herbs growing in mismatched containers on the windowsill, children's artwork magnetized. To the refrigerator. "So this mysterious Harbor Springs place," she began, pouring wine into stemless glasses. "I looked it up online. Seems lovely. Vacation rental?" I accepted the offered wine, deciding how much to reveal immediately. "Something like that. I'll explain more about it soon, but first, how are things with you and the kids? And with Mom?" Eleanor leaned against the counter, absently tucking a strand of auburn hair behind her ear. "The kids are good. Lucas made the soccer team, which has been a confidence boost. Sophia's having some friendship drama, but that seems to be the perpetual state of 10-year-old girls." She took a sip of wine before continuing. "As for Mom, complicated. She's been unusually reflective since your departure. Initially defensive, of course, but gradually more willing to consider other perspectives. We had a rather intense conversation last week about family patterns that would have been unimaginable before all this happened." The shift in Eleanor's tone was notable, more self-aware, less defensive than during our previous interactions. "That sounds like progress," I offered. "It is," she agreed, "though we still have significant ground to cover. But you didn't come here to discuss my evolving relationship with Mom. You mentioned important information about Dad's intentions?" I reached for my portfolio, removing the folder Ryan had provided. "Yes, some documents have emerged from the Mackenzie firm that shed light on what Dad actually wanted for Oak Ridge." Eleanor's expression tightened slightly, wariness replacing curiosity. "What kind of documents?" Rather than interpreting her reaction, I simply presented the facts. Correspondence between Dad and Gerald Mackenzie from the weeks before his death. They were discussing specific plans for Oak Ridge that differ significantly from both the original will and Mom's recent actions. I passed her the key email containing our father's detailed instructions. Eleanor read it silently, her expression shifting from concern to surprise, and finally to a complex mix of emotions too layered to easily name. "He wanted me to have the house," she said quietly when she finished reading. "But for you to receive compensation from selling the additional acreage." "Yes," I confirmed. "He recognized our different relationships with Oak Ridge while ensuring equitable financial outcomes." Eleanor set the document down carefully, as if it might disintegrate. "Under pressure. Why didn't this happen? Why weren't these instructions followed?" According to Ryan Mackenzie, Dad's decline accelerated before the formal documents could be completed. After his death, with Mom as executor and the original will still legally binding, these preliminary discussions were overlooked. "Overlooked," Eleanor repeated, echoing my own response to that inadequate explanation. "So Mom either didn't know about Dad's intentions or chose to ignore them when she transferred everything to me." "That's what we need to determine," I said. "Ryan hasn't shared these documents with Mom yet. He approached me first, but he's ethically obligated to inform all relevant parties." Eleanor refilled her wine glass, movements deliberate as she processed this information. "These documents give you legal standing to challenge the property transfer, don't they?" The question was direct, unembellished with justifications or defenses, another sign of our evolving communication. "Yes," I acknowledged. "While not formally executed, they provide compelling evidence of Dad's intentions that a court would likely find persuasive." Eleanor nodded slowly, accepting this reality without immediate protest. "So what happens now? Do we enter some protracted legal battle over Oak Ridge?" "That's one possibility," I said, "but not the one I'm proposing." Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "What are you proposing?" I took a measured breath, organizing thoughts that had crystallized during my time at Point Haven. "I'm proposing we implement Dad's solution, the one he didn't live long enough to formalize. You keep Oak Ridge Manor and the immediate grounds. The additional acreage is sold, with proceeds divided according to Dad's specified percentages." Eleanor studied me, with undisguised surprise. "You're not going to fight for half of everything? You could, with these documents." "I could," I agreed. "But that wasn't what Dad wanted. He understood something important about us, Eleanor. He recognized your deeper emotional connection to Oak Ridge itself and my more practical relationship with its value. His solution honored both perspectives while preventing exactly the conflict that's now emerged. And you're willing to accept his judgment on this, even after everything that's happened?" I considered the question carefully. Dad's solution makes sense, not because he was our father and we should automatically defer to his wishes, but because he saw our family dynamics with remarkable clarity. He recognized both our differences and our shared heritage, and found a way to honor both. Eleanor moved from the counter to the kitchen table, gesturing for me to join her. The documents lay between us as she sorted through her thoughts. "The irony is that Mom's attempt to protect me has actually put me in an impossible position," she said finally. "By transferring everything without your knowledge or consent, she created a situation where I'm either complicit in your disinheritance or forced to reject her gift." Dad anticipated exactly this problem, I noted. He saw that joint ownership would create tension, but completely favoring one daughter would create resentment. His middle path acknowledged our different needs while maintaining equity. Eleanor tapped her fingers lightly on the table, a habit from childhood that emerged during moments of deep consideration. "What would this actually look like in practice? The sale of the additional acreage?" The question shifted our conversation from theoretical to practical, another positive sign. The property survey already distinguishes the manor's immediate grounds from the larger parcel. We could work with a real estate specialist to determine optimal division and timing for sale. And you would receive 70% of the proceeds? According to Dad's plan, yes, with 30% returning to you for maintenance and preservation of the manor. Eleanor nodded slowly. "That's actually quite reasonable. The manor requires significant upkeep, as you know. Having dedicated funds for maintenance would ensure it remains viable long-term. The absence of defensiveness or immediate rejection represented remarkable progress from our confrontation at Oak Ridge. Whether through my extended absence, her own reflection, or simply the objective evidence of our father's intentions, Eleanor seemed genuinely open to reconsidering the current arrangement. "There's something else you should know," I said after a moment, deciding complete transparency was necessary for true reconciliation. "Something that may help explain my perspective on all this." I described Point Haven, the lighthouse property my father had purchased and placed in trust for me, the financial arrangements he had made to ensure my independent security, the letter explaining his motivations for creating this separate inheritance. Eleanor listened without interruption, her expression transitioning from surprise to understanding, and finally to a rueful smile. "So all this time I've been worried about you being disinherited, you actually had this incredible property waiting for you?" "I only discovered it recently myself," I explained. "The trust specified my 40th birthday for disclosure, but Bennett informed me early given the Oak Ridge situation." "Dad was protecting you," Eleanor said softly, "creating a safety net beyond Mom's influence." "Yes, and now I'm proposing we honor his wishes for Oak Ridge as well." Eleanor rose from the table, moving to the window that overlooked her small courtyard garden. For several minutes she stood in silence, processing everything she had learned. When she turned back, her expression held newfound clarity. "I want to do this properly," she said decisively. "Not just because these documents give you legal leverage, but because it's what Dad intended and what's fair. You deserve your share of the family legacy, Olivia." The acknowledgement, simple, direct, without qualification, represented a fundamental shift in our communication. No defensiveness, no deflection, just recognition of a basic truth that had been overlooked in recent events. "What about Mom?" I asked, addressing the most significant potential obstacle to implementation. Eleanor sighed. That won't be easy. She's invested in her narrative that I needed Oak Ridge more than you did. Convincing her to acknowledge Dad's different perspective will take work. We could approach her together, I suggested. Not confrontationally, but presenting Dad's solution as a way to honor his wishes while resolving current tensions. A united front rather than opposing sides, Eleanor mused. That would be a first. The observation contained both humor and truth. Throughout our lives, Eleanor and I had been positioned as contrasts rather than allies, the responsible daughter versus the creative one, the independent achiever versus the one needing support. Approaching our mother together, advocating for the same outcome would represent unprecedented solidarity. I think it's our best option, I said. Ryan Mackenzie has offered to facilitate a family meeting with legal representation present. Having a neutral third party might help keep the conversation productive. Eleanor nodded. Agreed. And having Gerald Mackenzie there, someone Mom respects who can confirm these were actually Dad's intentions, will be crucial. We spent the next hour discussing practical details, how to approach our mother, what supporting information to prepare, potential objections to anticipate. The conversation flowed with surprising ease, our complementary strengths emerging naturally. Eleanor's emotional intelligence balanced my strategic thinking. My organizational skills complemented her creative problem-solving. As the evening progressed, our discussion expanded beyond Oak Ridge to broader reflections on family patterns and possibilities for healthier relationships moving forward. Without the immediate pressure of property disputes, we found space to acknowledge how limited roles had constrained both our individual development and our sisterly connection. I've envied your independence, Eleanor admitted as we moved to her living room with fresh glasses of wine. The way you built your career, your confidence in making decisions. Mom always emphasized how I needed protection, how I couldn't manage on my own. While I envied your freedom to pursue your passions, I countered. The support you received when taking creative risks, the emotional connection you maintained with Mom. These acknowledgments of how family dynamics had affected us differently yet significantly created new understanding between us. Not immediate resolution of decades of established patterns, but recognition that different experiences could exist simultaneously, each valid from its own perspective. As the evening concluded, we stood in Eleanor's entryway, the folder of documents secured in my portfolio for the upcoming conversation with our mother. The tentative hug that had greeted me was replaced by a more substantial embrace, one containing both apology and promise. Thank you, Eleanor said as we separated, for approaching this with fairness rather than justifiable anger, for seeing a path forward instead of just focusing on past injustice. We have Dad to thank for that, I replied. He saw us more clearly than we saw ourselves, and created a solution that respected both our differences and our shared heritage. Driving home through nighttime city streets, I reflected on the remarkable shift that had occurred in just one evening. The documents proving my father's intentions had provided necessary validation, certainly. But more significant was Eleanor's willingness to acknowledge the unfairness of the current arrangement and commit to rectifying it. Not from legal pressure, but from genuine recognition of equitable family responsibility. The conversation ahead with our mother would undoubtedly prove challenging. Catherine Caldwell's certainty in her own judgment had shaped our family dynamics for decades. Convincing her to acknowledge alternative perspectives, particularly those that contradicted her actions, would require patience and persistence from both her daughters. Yet for the first time, that challenge would be faced with Eleanor and me standing together rather than positioned on opposite sides of a family divide. That solidarity itself represented victory beyond property arrangements or financial distributions, the possibility of relationship based on mutual respect rather than prescribed roles. As I arrived home, I sent a brief update to Ryan Mackenzie, confirming our readiness to proceed with a family meeting and our preference for Gerald's participation given his direct knowledge of our father's intentions. The legal framework would provide necessary structure, but the real work would happen through honest conversation and willingness to honor both our father's wishes and each other's legitimate needs. The path forward had become clear. Not easy, certainly, but illuminated by understanding that transcended property disputes. Whatever the outcome of our conversation with our mother, Eleanor and I had already begun reconstructing our relationship on healthier foundations, stepping beyond the limiting roles that had defined us for too long. That transformation, I reflected as I prepared for sleep, represented the true inheritance my father had hoped to secure for his daughters. The Mackenzie and Powell conference room felt different this time, no longer just a professional setting, but the stage for a pivotal family moment. Gerald Mackenzie himself had agreed to facilitate, bringing the gravitas of his 40-year legal career and long association with our family to the proceedings. His son Ryan would also attend, primarily to manage documentation and procedural matters. Eleanor and I arrived together by deliberate choice, carpooling from a coffee shop where we'd spent an hour reviewing our approach. We had agreed to present a united position. Regardless of our mother's response, we would proceed with implementing our father's intended solution for Oak Ridge. This solidarity represented a significant shift in our sister dynamic, moving from the competitive positioning our mother had always fostered to mutual support for equitable resolution. Mother arrived precisely on time, as was her habit. Her composed entrance faltered momentarily when she noticed Eleanor and me sitting together on one side of the conference table rather than separated as she might have expected. Her greeting was polite but cautious, her elegant appearance. Tailored navy suit, pearls, immaculate silver bob, projecting the unflappable dignity she had cultivated throughout her life. Gerald Mackenzie welcomed everyone with professional warmth, establishing the meeting's purpose with clear, measured language. We're gathered to discuss recently discovered documents pertaining to William Caldwell's intentions for Oak Ridge Manor, and to determine appropriate steps forward in light of this information. Mother's eyebrows lifted slightly. Recently discovered documents? What exactly are we discussing, Gerald? Gerald nodded to Ryan, who distributed folders containing the email correspondence and related materials. Approximately 6 weeks before William's passing, he and I engaged in detailed discussions regarding specific plans for Oak Ridge that differed from the arrangements in his formal will. These communications outline a careful, considered approach to dividing the property in a way that acknowledged both daughters' different relationships with the estate while ensuring equitable financial outcomes. Mother opened the folder slowly, her reading glasses perched on the bridge of her nose as she reviewed the contents. Her expression remained carefully neutral, though the slight tightening around her mouth revealed growing tension as she absorbed our father's explicit instructions. When she finally looked up, she addressed Gerald rather than either of her daughters. These appear to be preliminary discussions, not executed legal documents. William never mentioned these plans to me. They were preliminary in form, but quite specific in substance, Gerald confirmed. William and I were actively developing the formal documents when his condition deteriorated more rapidly than expected. His intention to implement this solution was clear and consistent throughout our discussions. Mother turned her attention to Eleanor and me, her gaze assessing. "And you've both reviewed these materials?" We nodded in unison. "Olivia discovered them first through Ryan," Eleanor explained, "but shared them with me immediately. We've discussed Dad's plan extensively." Mother's eyes narrowed slightly at this evidence of our collaboration. "I see. And what conclusion have you reached from these incomplete preparations?" I leaned forward slightly, maintaining eye contact with my mother. "We believe Dad's solution represents a thoughtful approach that respects everyone's interests. Eleanor maintains ownership of Oak Ridge Manor itself with the immediate grounds, while the additional acreage is sold with proceeds divided according to Dad's specified percentages. This arrangement acknowledges my connection to the house, While ensuring Olivia receives her fair share of the inheritance, Eleanor added. It's what Dad wanted, Mom. He saw our different relationships with Oak Ridge clearly and found a solution that honored both. Mother's fingers tapped lightly on the folder, the only visible sign of her internal processing. What you're proposing would require unwinding the current arrangement, which has been legally executed and recorded. Gerald cleared his throat. From a legal perspective, Catherine, the transfer you executed contradicts William's clear intentions, as documented in these materials. While not formally executed due to his untimely passing, these instructions provide compelling evidence of his wishes, evidence that would carry significant weight in any legal proceeding. The implication was clear, but delivered with professional restraint. Challenging the current arrangement through legal channels was a viable option if necessary. Mother's expression hardened slightly. Are you threatening litigation, Olivia? I'm proposing implementation of Dad's solution, I replied evenly. Not as a threat, but as the fair and appropriate path forward. Dad understood our family dynamics with remarkable clarity. His arrangement prevents exactly the conflict that has now emerged. Conflict you created, Mother observed coolly, by refusing to accept the decisions I made as executor of William's estate and trustee of our family assets. Decisions that directly contradicted Dad's expressed intentions, I countered, maintaining composure despite the familiar dismissal. Decisions made without consultation or transparency, affecting inheritance rightfully shared between both daughters. Mother's gaze shifted to Eleanor. And you support this proposal? After repeatedly expressing how essential Oak Ridge is to your stability and the children's well-being? I do, Eleanor said firmly. Olivia and I keep the house and immediate grounds, Mom. Nothing changes regarding our living situation. But the additional acreage that we don't use, that sits undeveloped and requires maintenance without providing benefit, is sold, with proceeds divided as Dad intended. Mother sat back in her chair, studying us both with the assessing gaze that had often preceded judgment throughout our childhood. But something subtle had shifted in the dynamic. Neither Eleanor nor I lowered our eyes or adjusted our positions. We remained steady, united in our presentation of a reasonable solution rather than adversarial demands. William didn't understand the financial realities Eleanor faces, Mother said finally. The cost of maintaining Oak Ridge, educating the children properly, establishing security after James's abandonment. His percentage allocation doesn't account for these ongoing needs. Dad's arrangement specifically includes 30% returning to Eleanor for manor maintenance and preservation, I noted. He considered those exact concerns in his planning. And the 70% allocated to you? Mother challenged. What purpose does that serve beyond enriching someone already financially secure? The question revealed the fundamental assumption that had driven her actions, that my independence and professional success somehow diminished my right to equitable inheritance. It was the pattern that had shaped our family dynamics for decades. Eleanor's needs justified special consideration while mine could be dismissed as unnecessary. Before I could respond, Eleanor intervened with unexpected directness. That's unfair, Mom. Olivia deserves her inheritance regardless of her financial situation. Dad's estate isn't meant to address immediate need, but to pass family legacy equitably. To both daughters. Mother's eyebrows rose at this defense from an unexpected quarter. You seem remarkably aligned on this issue. I thought you understood the necessity of securing Oak Ridge fully in your name, Eleanor. I understood your perspective, Eleanor clarified. But learning Dad's actual intentions has changed my view. He found a solution that protects my connection to Oak Ridge while acknowledging Olivia's equal right to inheritance. It's fair, Mom. More importantly, it's what Dad wanted. Gerald Mackenzie, who had been observing the exchange with professional restraint, interjected gently, If I may, Catherine, Having known William for over 30 years and participated in these specific discussions, I can confirm these arrangements reflected his careful consideration of everyone's interests. He valued family harmony and equitable treatment of both daughters, while recognizing their different needs and relationships with Oakridge. Mother's composed exterior revealed brief vulnerability, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her features, before the familiar, resolute expression returned. These discussions occurred during William's illness, when his judgment may have been affected by medication and declining health. Gerald shook his head definitively. I can attest to William's complete clarity during these conversations. His reasoning was thoughtful, consistent, and entirely lucid. These instructions represent his considered judgment about the best arrangement for Oakridge and for his family's future well-being. A prolonged silence followed as Mother assessed her increasingly limited options. The documentation of our father's intentions, Gerald's professional testimony, and the unexpected unity between Eleanor and me had effectively countered her previous justifications. What exactly are you proposing as next steps? She asked finally, her tone neutral but resigned. Ryan Mackenzie, who had remained professionally quiet during the exchange, opened a laptop and turned the screen toward us. We've prepared a framework for implementation that respects William's specified arrangement. The process would involve several coordinated steps. He outlined a comprehensive approach: property survey confirmation, appraisal of the additional acreage, development of marketing strategy for the land sale, establishment of appropriate trusts for the eventual proceeds, and legal documentation formally implementing our father's intended distribution. Throughout the presentation, Mother remained silent, her expression revealing little of her internal response. When Ryan concluded, she closed the folder deliberately and looked between Eleanor and me. You've clearly made your decision, regardless of my input or concerns, she observed. I suppose I'm expected to simply approve this restructuring without objection. We're asking you to honor Dad's wishes, Eleanor said quietly. The same way you've always expected us to honor yours. The simple statement contained layers of meaning, acknowledging the pattern of deference Mother had demanded throughout our lives, while suggesting a parallel obligation to respect our father's clearly expressed intentions. Mother's lips pressed together briefly. And if I refuse? If I maintain that the current arrangement best serves family interests? Gerald Mackenzie cleared his throat gently. Catherine, I've known your family for decades and represented William's legal interests with absolute fidelity. While these discussions never reached formal execution, they clearly establish William's intentions for Oakridge. Challenging implementation would likely result in protracted legal proceedings with uncertain outcome and definite emotional cost. The measured statement delivered its implied message. Resistance would likely prove both legally unsuccessful and destructively divisive. So I have no actual choice in this matter, Mother concluded, an edge of bitterness in her tone. You have the same choice we all have, I said, meeting her gaze directly. To honor Dad's wishes for equitable treatment of both daughters, or to insist on arrangements that ignore his clearly expressed intentions. Eleanor added softly, This isn't about winning or losing, Mom. It's about finding a solution that respects everyone's legitimate interests. Exactly what Dad was trying to accomplish. Mother studied us both for a long moment, perhaps seeing, for the first time, that the dynamic had fundamentally shifted. No longer was I the dutiful daughter who would eventually acquiesce to maintain family harmony. No longer was Eleanor dependent on maternal protection at any cost. We had emerged as adults capable of recognizing unfairness and advocating for equitable treatment, even when that meant challenging established patterns. I need time to consider these materials more carefully, she said finally, gathering her belongings with deliberate movements. Gerald, I'll contact your office tomorrow with my response. It wasn't acceptance, but neither was it outright rejection. The absence of immediate dismissal represented progress in itself, acknowledgement that her unilateral approach no longer commanded automatic deference. As the meeting concluded, Eleanor and I exchanged glances containing shared understanding. Whatever Mother's ultimate response, we would proceed with implementing our father's solution. The documentation provided legal pathway if necessary, but more importantly, our unity created psychological strength that couldn't be undermined by familiar tactics of division. Outside the Mackenzie and Powell offices, Mother paused briefly before entering her car. This coordinated presentation was unexpected, she observed, studying us with the assessing gaze that had evaluated our choices throughout childhood. When did you two become such allies? When we started actually talking to each other instead of competing for approval, Eleanor replied with simple honesty. It's been enlightening, Mom. Mother's expression shifted subtly. Not quite acceptance, not quite understanding, but perhaps recognition that something fundamental had changed in her daughter's relationship with each other, and by extension, with her. I'll call you both tomorrow, she said, sliding into her car with characteristic grace. As we watched her drive away, Eleanor turned to me with a smile containing equal parts relief and determination. Well, that went exactly as expected, and nothing like expected simultaneously. She'll agree eventually, I predicted. The legal reality combined with our united position doesn't leave viable alternatives. It's not just about Oak Ridge anymore, is it? Eleanor observed as we walked toward my car. It's about reconstructing how we relate to each other, all of us. The observation captured perfectly the transformation that had occurred through this process. What had begun as property dispute had evolved into fundamental recalibration of family dynamics, relationships built on mutual respect rather than prescribed roles, on recognition of different needs without hierarchy of importance. As we drove, away from the Mackenzie offices, I felt unexpected optimism about the path ahead. Not because all difficulties had been resolved, but because the foundation for healthier resolution had been established. Whatever challenges remained would be navigated from this new position of clarity and mutual support, the true inheritance our father had hoped to secure for his daughters. Mother's call came the following afternoon while I was reviewing client portfolios in my office. Her voice carried its usual composed authority, though a subtle undercurrent of resignation colored her tone. I've consulted with Gerald further regarding your father's correspondence and considered all perspectives on the situation, she began without preamble. While I maintain that my decisions were made with the family's best interests in mind, I recognize that William had developed specific intentions for Oak Ridge that differ from the current arrangement. It wasn't quite acceptance, but it was movement. Thank you for considering the documentation, I replied, keeping my tone neutral rather than triumphant. What are your thoughts on implementation? I've instructed Gerald to proceed with the framework his firm proposed. The property survey should begin next week, followed by appraisal of the additional acreage. She paused briefly. I expect to be consulted throughout the process, particularly regarding marketing strategy for the land sale. Some parcels have conservation value that should be properly represented. Her insistence on involvement was characteristic. Mother had never relinquished control without maintaining some oversight. But the fundamental shift had been accomplished. Acknowledgement of our father's intended solution and agreement to its implementation. Of course, I assured her. This isn't about excluding you from the process, just ensuring the outcome aligns with Dad's expressed wishes. After concluding the call, I immediately contacted Eleanor to share the development. Her relief was audible. I honestly wasn't sure she would agree without legal pressure, she admitted. This is significant progress. She's establishing conditions for her cooperation, but the essential point is acceptance of the restructuring, I observed. I suspect Gerald helped her understand the limited alternatives. Or perhaps she's recognizing that her daughters are united in this matter, Eleanor suggested. and that old patterns of division won't succeed anymore. The observation contained important truth. Mother's approach to family management had always involved separate handling of her daughters, different expectations, different forms of support, different types of approval. Our solidarity represented unprecedented challenge to this established system. Over the following weeks, the implementation process proceeded with remarkable efficiency. Property boundaries were confirmed through professional survey. Appraisals established current market value for both Oak Ridge Manor with its immediate grounds and the additional acreage designated for sale. Ryan Mackenzie coordinated development of legal documentation to formalize the arrangement, incorporating specific language from our father's correspondence to ensure alignment with his expressed intentions. Throughout this period, Eleanor and I maintained regular communication, collaborating on decisions and presenting unified positions when our mother attempted to modify aspects of the implementation. This continued solidarity gradually shifted the family dynamic, mother's automatic authority giving way to more collaborative discussion, her unilateral decisions replaced by negotiated agreements. 3 months after our confrontation in the Mackenzie offices, we gathered again to sign the final documentation. The December afternoon brought early darkness, the conference room windows reflecting our images against the black glass as Gerald Mackenzie distributed the prepared documents. These materials accomplish several important objectives, he explained, his manner both professional and personal after decades of family association. First, they formalize Eleanor's ownership of Oak Ridge Manor with its immediate 5 acres, ensuring continuation of the current living arrangement. Second, they establish framework for sale of the additional 35 acres, with proceeds to be distributed according to Williams' specified percentages. Third, they create appropriate trusts for both daughters, structured for optimal tax, treatment, and long-term asset management. Mother reviewed each document carefully before signing, her reading glasses perched precisely on her nose, her fountain pen making deliberate strokes on the signature lines. Her acquiescence remained pragmatic rather than enthusiastic, but the fundamental shift had been accomplished: recognition of equitable treatment for both daughters rather than prioritization of one over the other. As we concluded the signing, Gerald raised an unexpected toast with sparkling water served in crystal glasses kept for special client occasions. "To William's wisdom and foresight," he said, his voice carrying genuine emotion after nearly 40 years of friendship with our father, "and to family resolution that honors his intentions while creating foundation for future harmony." To the EI, simple ceremony marked formal conclusion of the property dispute, but the deeper transformation of family relationships continued evolving beyond legal documentation. In the weeks that followed, subtle shifts occurred in our interactions. Changes, small individually but cumulatively significant. Mother began consulting both daughters on family decisions rather than announcing predetermined outcomes. Eleanor demonstrated increasing independence, making choices without automatically seeking maternal approval. I expressed opinions more directly, no longer filtering perspectives through the lens of anticipated family reaction. Most notably, Eleanor and I continued developing relationship independent of our mother's mediation. Weekly sister lunches became routine, conversations expanding beyond immediate family matters to shared interests and individual aspirations. The prescribed roles that had limited our connection, the responsible professional and the artistic, free spirit, gradually gave way to fuller recognition of our complex, multidimensional identities. On Christmas Eve, Mother hosted traditional family dinner at her elegant condominium overlooking the river, her home since transferring Oak Ridge to Eleanor. The gathering included Eleanor's children, who had grown remarkably during the months of family recalibration. Sophia at 10 demonstrated emerging artistic talent clearly inherited from her mother, while Lucas at 8 showed surprising mechanical aptitude that reminded me of our father's practical skills. As we gathered around Mother's formal dining table, set with the family china and silver as always, I noticed subtle differences in the atmosphere. The conversation flowed more naturally, less constrained by unspoken hierarchies and expectations. Eleanor's children contributed observations without the excessive monitoring that had previously characterized family meals. Mother listened more than directed, her traditional role as conversation conductor yielding to more equitable participation. After dinner, as the children played checkers near the fireplace, Mother unexpectedly handed each daughter a small wrapped package. "These aren't your primary Christmas gifts," she explained with uncharacteristic hesitation. "Those are under the tree for tomorrow. These are something different." The identical boxes contained vintage jewelry cases, the velvet exterior slightly worn with age. Inside mine lay our grandmother's sapphire pendant, an heirloom I had admired throughout childhood but never expected to receive, given Mother's tendency to reserve significant family pieces for Eleanor. "Your grandmother wanted you to have this," Mother said, watching my surprised expression. "She specified it in her own instructions, which I've kept private until now. The sapphires match your eyes," she always said. "And for Eleanor..." Eleanor opened her box to reveal grandmother's ruby earrings, their deep red stones capturing firelight. "She thought these complemented your artistic temperament," Mother continued. "I should have shared these bequests years ago. Your grandmother intended each of you to have pieces that reflected your individual qualities, rather than prioritizing one over the other." The simple acknowledgement that both daughters deserved recognition through family heirlooms represented profound shift in Mother's approach. No longer was Eleanor's perceived vulnerability justification for greater consideration. No longer was my independence reason for diminished inheritance. Our grandmother had recognized our equal standing within the family legacy, and Mother was finally honoring that intention. The symbolism paralleled our father's carefully considered arrangements for Oak Ridge, recognition of different relationships with family assets without hierarchy of importance. The revelation that both our parents had intended equitable treatment, despite Mother's temporary deviation from this principle, provided foundation for healthier family relationships moving forward. As the evening concluded, I found myself on Mother's balcony despite the December chill, watching city lights reflected on the river's dark surface. Mother joined me unexpectedly, wrapping a cashmere throw around my shoulders with uncharacteristic attention to physical comfort. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.